Queensland, and a new public battle has broken out between Sir Joh Bjelke-Peterson and the man who deposed him as Queensland Premier, Mike Ahern. Mr Ahern today challenged Sir Joh to speak up or shut up after reported threats by Sir Joh to reveal details of corruption within the party. The threat sparked an angry reaction after a cabinet meeting in the state's far north.
North Queensland's sugar town of Mossman hosted the Queensland Cabinet today, but attention was drawn away from local issues by Sir Joh Bjelke-Peterson. At the Fitzgerald inquiry, Sir Joh claimed surprise there was corruption in Queensland. But in a national newspaper today, Sir Joh is quoted as saying, "I wasn't corrupt, but I knew there had to be corruption within the party." Premier Mike Ahern has reacted angrily.
The time has come for him to put up or shut up.
Mr Ahern also says Sir Joh's autobiography should be handed over to the Fitzgerald inquiry if it includes further evidence of corruption, as he implies.
It is inexcusable that anyone at this stage says that I have information that I will soon reveal. That should have been done.
The Labor opposition was quick to seize on Sir Joh's statements to turn up the pressure on the Ahern government.
There's a lot more evidence of corruption to come out, and we'll do all that we can to get it out. And if any substantial evidence is brought forward by Joh Bjelke-Peterson, there's going to have to be an inquiry. And if there's any other cabinet ministers or senior National Party figures that are involved in it, well, they've got to be brought to account.
And Sir Joh Bjelke-Peterson will be one of 3 star witnesses at the inquiry into suspended District Court Judge Eric Pratt. Day 1 of the inquiry was told former Police Commissioner Sir Terence Lewis and disgraced former Cabinet Minister Don Lane would also be called. The inquiry has already recommended the sacking of stood-down Supreme Court Judge Angelo Vasta.
Just 3 weeks after the adverse findings against Judge Vasta, Judge Eric Pratt fronted the same tribunal of 3 retired judges. The 56-year-old stood-down District Court judge sat with daughter Louise as counsel assisting the inquiry, Ian Hanger QC, outlined his case. He'll quiz former Police Commissioner Sir Terence Lewis on 10 points relating to Judge Pratt, investigate the judge's friendship with disgraced former Cabinet Minister Don Lane, and call former Premier Sir Joh Bjelke-Peterson to answer matters he raised in Cabinet relating to the judge. Sir Joh will also be asked why he and Sir Terence Lewis had a briefing session with the judge to discuss cases before the Police Complaints Tribunal, of which Judge Pratt was chairman. Among other matters to be inquired into are 6 Police Complaints Tribunal cases, whether the judge was inappropriately involved in the administration of the Queensland Police Force, and his relationship with former self-confessed police bagman Jack Herbert. For the first time since the judge's inquiry began, State Cabinet notes and minutes will be tendered in evidence. The 3 retired judges must present their final report to Parliament by July the 31st.
Air traffic controllers who have been locked in a long battle with the federal government have warned travellers to expect more disruptions. Controllers say they won't back down in their demands for better working conditions, despite stand-down threats by the federal government. And they've warned the situation will get worse as controllers opt instead to resign.
This morning, Sydney awoke beneath a spectacular blanket of fog and again under the cloud of airport disruptions. Both Mascot and Bankstown airports were closed for nearly 5 hours. Flights were diverted to Melbourne and Brisbane, throwing the day's schedule into chaos.
According to the notice boards in the terminals this morning, we've used our ultimate industrial weapon in our sophisticated and orchestrated campaign. That's our fog machine.
But the air traffic controllers aren't joking. Last week, the Prime Minister threatened that with fines or stand-down orders if disruptions continue. Today, they hit back, throwing out the government's so-called peace package because they say it doesn't address their real concerns for the safety of Sydney Airport.
It's the government's responsibility to ensure that the air traffic system is capable of coping with the demands of the aviation industry, not individual controllers. And we can no longer accept the blame for closures when we are doing everything that's required of us.
Controllers know they're losing the battle for public support, but they say they won't back down. And they warn the government's threats are only making things worse, adding impetus to many controllers' thoughts of resignation.
I don't see very much of a future in air traffic control for myself. I can only put it to you that way. The system is falling apart around our ears and we're being made the scapegoat for it.
Further north now to Papua New Guinea, where Australian families have been ordered to leave the island of Bougainville, where terrorist attacks have shut down the billion-dollar copper mine. The mine, operated by CRA, will be closed until at least July, and the company is flying the families out for their own safety.
Bougainville Copper Limited denies that this is part of an evacuation plan. But there's no denying that's what it's beginning to look like. All but non-essential employees have been told to take leave starting today. And according to a company statement, those non-essential employees and all families will be assisted to return to the place of their recruitment should they so desire. The company says its employees' safety is their first priority, and it hopes the early leave program will help alleviate the apprehensions these people have been living with. The reopening of the Bougainville copper mine depends upon the peaceful resolution of the Bougainville crisis. We're 6 days into a government-declared 15-day truce, during which the leader of the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, Francis Ahern, has been promised freedom from harassment if he'll talk. He's told the Bishop of Bougainville he will, but only if the riot police and the soldiers are withdrawn from Bougainville. This is not the first time a breakthrough in the long-drawn-out landowners' troubles has seemed promising. For some of the departing Australians, the 7 months of trouble has been too much, and they won't be coming back.
Japan's former Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone has consigned himself to the political scrap heap, a victim of the recruit scandal. He's resigning from the Liberal Democratic Party in a move to pave the way for his close associate, Foreign Minister Sasuke Uno, to become Premier.
The 66-year-old Foreign Minister has not been touched by the bribery scandal. The party power brokers are confident too that Mr Uno will be a backseat Prime Minister, while the faction leaders stay in the driver's seat. Mr Uno is in Paris attending a conference. His succession is being organised by the current Prime Minister, Mr Takeshita, who has admitted taking more than $1 million in donations from the recruit company. A party meeting on Thursday will elect the new Prime Minister, but Mr Takeshita will have a large say in choosing the replacement ministry. His predecessor as Prime Minister, Mr Nakasone, has announced his resignation from the party and as a faction leader. Mr Nakasone was Prime Minister in the period up to 1987, when most of the bribes were paid. By leaving the party, Mr Nakasone is trying to put an end to the turmoil that has paralysed Japan's government.
In China, the student revolution seems to be running out of steam after a fortnight of extraordinary pro-democracy demonstrations. Around the capital, Beijing, the government's massed up to 300,000 troops in an apparent bid to discourage any new protests. From the Chinese capital, Max Utrich reports.
Troops have been arriving by the truckload from provincial centres. Some reports say more than 100,000 extra soldiers are in Beijing or waiting for orders on the outskirts. The increased number of troops around the city has added an air of intimidation. Analysts are puzzled by the build-up. Perhaps it's a measure of one-upmanship. Or is the political power struggle still unresolved? Chinese sources say Zhao Ziyang heads an official list of 12 men to be charged with offences against the party. But perhaps the build-up is just because the government feels it can no longer rely on the loyalty of the 100,000 troops who stopped in the face of massive public demonstration last Saturday.
Here in Tiananmen Square, the numbers are dwindling. Many students are very tired and dispirited, but the hardcore diehards say they'll hang on and stage a victory march tomorrow.
But there's confusion here too. The banners in the square today suggest the bulk of the protesters are now from provincial universities, and some don't want to pull out.
The students' spirit are very, very high, and they will try to fight to the end, I think.
But it's uncertain whether those who are left behind can rekindle the nation's democratic fervour.
Leaders of the Western Alliance are in Brussels for NATO's 40th anniversary summit, a meeting likely to be overshadowed by the lingering row over short-range nuclear missiles based in West Germany. In a bid to influence the agenda and gain the initiative on arms control, President Bush has offered a 20% cut in America's military presence in Europe. Our European correspondent, Ian Henderson.
NATO and West Germany have turned 40 together, and both confront a midlife crisis at this summit. For NATO, it's a crisis of cohesion in the face of President Gorbachev's vigorous diplomacy. For West Germany, it's a crisis of confidence in NATO's strategy of flexible response, which pits these Lance short-range nuclear missiles against a notional Soviet attack. This is Tübingen, an old university town in southwest Germany. Nearby, at Groß-Engstingen, is a military base where Lance missiles are deployed. It's all quiet now, but there have been several big demonstrations here against the missiles. And in Tübingen's historic marketplace, feelings still run high.
They must be going out.
I don't think it's fair of the Americans to in fact prepare for a sort of war which keeps them out and has us in.
West Germany says NATO should start bargaining away its Lance missiles now. America says not until there have been big cuts in conventional arms first. And despite exhaustive efforts to negotiate a 40th anniversary compromise, they've come to this summit as far apart as ever. So President Bush has arrived in Brussels determined to open up another front. He's expected to announce cuts of up to 10% in American troops and warplanes based in Europe. The president clearly hopes to steal Gorbachev's mantle as peacemaker and distract attention from the embarrassing rift on Lance. NATO desperately wants a show of unity on its birthday, but German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher is in an uncompromising mood. Better to end the summit in open dissension, he's reported to have said, than for the Germans to crawl on their knees.
Meanwhile, Mikhail Gorbachev, the reforming president, faces a tough battle with other reformers when the new Soviet parliament resumes tonight. Former Communist Party chief in the capital, Boris Yeltsin, who won by a landslide in the open elections, has not been appointed to the Supreme Soviet, and his supporters want to know why.
Boris Yeltsin, the former Moscow Communist Party chief who set out with Mikhail Gorbachev, is Moscow's hero. 6 million voters in the Soviet capital elected Yeltsin to the Congress, but he failed to win a seat in the smaller but much more powerful Supreme Soviet. A conservative majority of communists in the Congress from the various republics rejected him. They also voted down a number of other reform-minded deputies. In the demonstrations officially sanctioned by the Kremlin, Yeltsin's supporters became more outspoken. One radical accused the Congress of electing a Stalinite Brezhnevite Supreme Soviet. Human rights activist Andrei Sakharov accused Mr. Gorbachev of manipulating the deputies in the Congress. Security forces stood by at the protest meetings, but took no action.
Back home now, with a quick look at other stories around the nation, a full bench of the federal court has begun a test case to establish whether the federal government's entitled to grant Northern Territory land to Aborigines without compensating previous landholders. In far north Queensland, a ban has been imposed on the shooting and trapping of crocodiles in the Daintree River north of Mossman. Conservation Minister Jeff Muntz agreed to the change to allow the removal of only designated problem crocodiles. Growing demand by Australian wine buffs for premium varietal wines is now strongly influencing the industry's production outlook for the next few years. Chardonnay is far and away the most popular variety identified in a recent survey by the Wine Research Council. Bad news on the finance front tonight. Jackson's, a publicly listed stockbroking firm, has been forced to appoint a provisional liquidator. As Prue LeWarn reports, the broking firm's failure comes as something of a shock, but may not be the last.
As debate continues over the health of the economy, the stockbroking industry is already in recession. Imagine an investment worth $4.60 in 1987, and by last Friday, just 10 cents. That's been the plight of independent stockbroker Jackson's, one of only 2 publicly listed brokers, now in provisional liquidation thanks to investor rejection of the stock market since the crash.
It's high interest rates that makes investing in shares increasingly unattractive. By comparison, government bonds pay well and there's no risk involved. Little wonder then that business here is so quiet that Jackson's has gone bust and that many more are expected to follow.
Sitting on cash can get you 18%, 20% per annum in some instances, and it's a very hard decision to go into the equity market.
Jackson's made a profit of $6 million in the year before the crash. In the year after, losses of $7 million. Most big stockbrokers are now owned by banks. Jackson's wasn't, and it's the other small independent operations which are now an endangered species. At the stock exchange today, the All Ordinaries managed a rise of 5 points, and our dollar finished just shy of 74 cents.
Well, they say it pays to advertise. According to our business commentator Roger Johnston, that's precisely what a big Canadian company intends doing in Australia, and their competition is edgy.
There's a sleeping giant about to awaken in the Australian marketplace. It's the multinational Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest grocery groups in the world. Up till now, its presence here has been small, with products like Vicks Vapor Rub, Camay and Oil of Ulan. But P&G is starting to flex its muscles under the watchful eye of Canadian marketing expert Dennis Beausejour. With P&G's army of worldwide products, local competitors like Johnson & Johnson, Colgate-Palmolive and Lever & Kitchen know there's going to be an all-out attack on market share. That's because when P&G launch a product, it's backed by big budgets. In the US, annual expenditure on advertising alone is an incredible $1.5 billion. So being last into Australia doesn't worry the P&G men. They think they've got the answers and the products. First off the line has been Pert Shampoo and Flash Double Magic. Both products are multi-purpose. The shampoo is also a conditioner and the cleaner can be used on a variety of surfaces, including windows. Next we'll see NyQuil, a cold remedy which also helps you sleep. So the strategy is clear. Why buy two products when one can do both jobs? Also, by straddling markets, P&G believes it can appeal to retailers looking to maximise that shelf space. It's going to be some marketing battle.
Roger Johnston. Well, finally tonight we go with reporter Jim Slade to a small town in West Virginia in the United States to pay homage to the Iron Horse. The town and its railroad, snaking to the hills where timber was once cut, has been preserved for posterity.
Welcome to Cass, West Virginia, Mecca of the pharaoh equinologist, lover of the Iron Horse. The faithful come here to watch a special kind of steam locomotive operate in its natural setting, knowing that it's something that nearly got away. Cass started in the lumber business in 1900, a mountain, isolated company town built to operate a huge sawmill. Woodhicks, or lumberjacks, lived and worked along the 50-mile spine of Cheat Mountain, harvesting the timber that made it go. They were a special breed themselves, living a hard life few of us could endure today. Local historian Stella Blackhurst says they'd stay up there as long as 6 months at a time, or until they'd cut a notch a day around the brim of their hat. Then they'd hop a log train to town, draw their pay, and cross the river from Cass to have a time. And she says when they were done or too drunk to care, somebody would dump them on the train and send them back to camp to work some more. They depended on that train in more ways than one. For nearly 60 years, the trains battled the impossible grades, carrying supplies and people up in the morning and hauling down 13 cars full of logs in the afternoon. Getting up there was backbreaking. A good fireman could put a ton or two in the firebox one way. But eventually, the timber ran out. And on July 1st, 1960, Cass was just shut down and left to die. Racing a company hired to scrap the railroad, interested rail fans and businessmen appealed to a skeptical West Virginia legislature. It took months, but they won, and the state bought Cass to make the world's first 11-mile-long, 15-foot-wide state park. The stars of the show are the Shays, engines built with vertical pistons connected to drive shafts, powering all 12 sprung wheels to let them run on steep, uneven track. This one, number 5, has been running on the Cass line ever since 1905. Its engineer, Artie Barkley, has been absorbed by the engines since he was a boy at Cass.
You really like the job, don't you?
Yeah, I like steam. Yep. If it was a diesel, I wouldn't care a thing about it. But you get steam in your blood, she's there.
The engineers are cult heroes who treat the rare old engines like children to keep them running. Thousands of tourists come every year to watch the trains and their people work, to ride up the mountain, and to thrill again to steam's distinctive sound.
A bonus for train bus, that one. Now the national weather summary. Widespread rain is forecast from cloud with a cold front moving through the eastern half of the continent. Some patchy falls are likely along the east coast. Showers also forecast for main centres in the southeast, and there'll be falls in the west, but the Northern Territory should be mainly fine. And that's the way we saw the world this Monday, May 29. Tomorrow's the big day for NATO, celebrating 40 years of cooperation. But all's not well in the alliance. The Germans want short-range nuclear missiles scrapped in a deal with Moscow. But America and Britain don't agree. And caught in the middle, the ordinary people of Germany.
Make the world turn around, make the world turn around, make the world turn around. I want to live in the world of gladness. I want to know what your heart is made of. Don't want to live in the world of sadness. I want to live in the world of love. living in a world of size.
A very special ballet premiere.